Madam Speaker, fellow colleagues of Parliament. Madam Speaker, I want to take the opportunity to report to Parliament and also to the people of St. Lucia really the occurrences over the last several weeks. I'm quoted as describing the situation as being the perfect storm. And that is the combination of Hurricane Harvey, Hurricane Irma, Hurricane Jose, and Hurricane Maria. And that when you then also include that with the earthquakes that were taking place simultaneously in Mexico. So although Hurricane Harvey, Madam Speaker, did not necessarily impact our region severely, I know that in St. Vincent and in Barbados in particular, there were several floodings. But Harvey obviously laid much damage to the state of Texas, and in particular to the city of Houston. And at this point, I really want to express my sympathies to the many St. Lucians who live in Houston for their losses and damage to their own personal effects. I have, as Prime Minister, made 3 attempts, Madam Speaker, to visit Houston. Because on 2 occasions recently I have been in the state of Texas. And unfortunately, for one reason or another, that we've not been able to coordinate with the diaspora, either that it was too early, or in fact that they were now doing many issues themselves, and for personal reasons it could not happen. But my intention is to be able to visit our St. Lucian diaspora in Houston as soon as it's possible. And that also applies, Madam Speaker, to our St. Lucians who live in St. Martin, in St. Croix in particular. We all know that we have a lot of St. Lucians who are living in St. Croix. But the fact is that Houston is a critical gateway for the Caribbean, not only for airlift, but obviously for cargo. And that Houston was literally taken out of commission for a period of time. Following Hurricane Harvey, we had Hurricane Irma. And at this point, Madam Speaker, I really want to acknowledge the efforts and the work, particularly of the Secretary General of the OECS, Mr. Didicus Jules, who came to my office approximately 2 days prior to Irma hitting. And in fact, that I am chairman of the OECS, and I'm also the lead Prime Minister in CARICOM for Sustainable Development and Disasters. And that we were able to work with SEDEMA in making up some of the shortfalls that we were seeing in our plan. I must really congratulate SEDEMA for the works that they've been doing, and particularly with some very limited resources. But the fact is the plans that we had were really concentrated on the emergency situations that existed within the countries. And what we saw was a lack of coordination on a regional level. So in fact, when Irma was first coming, it was proposed, or it was projected, that Irma was going to hit Antigua and St. Kitts. And so automatically, in our minds, that brought Martinique and St. Lucia into play, Madam Speaker. And that's why we immediately had meetings here in St. Lucia. And again, I want to thank the Chamber of Commerce, the Hotels Association, the Manufacturing Association, the Employers Federation, and the unions. And in particular, I want to thank the staff of SRASPA for moving so quickly to be able to do a quick audit of space here in St. Lucia. And Madam Speaker, that space really had more to do with, if in fact we had to have St. Lucia being used as an evacuation point, meaning that if in fact jets could not arrive into Antigua and to St. Kitts, and that they had to extract people who were either hurt or tourists or nationals that needed to be evacuated, that they would not be able to do so, Madam Speaker. And so we immediately sent out notices to all the relevant airlines that St. Lucia would waive all landing fees, and that our air traffic controllers would remain open for 24 hours a day, as long as it was necessary. We also were able to find how much space we had at the airports in terms of cargo, and we did the same thing at the seaports. So I was very appreciative of the work that Didicus Jules had done, and in terms of the anticipation of what was going to take place. Fortunately, Madam Speaker, fortunately for Antigua and St. Kitts, the impact of Hurricane Irma wasn't as severe as it was on Barbuda, as it was on Anguilla, as it was on the BVI, and certainly as it was on the Virgin Islands. Irma then continued a path up northwards, and we saw that Puerto Rico was shut down while Irma was passing by, and that preparations were being made very much in advance to be able to shut down Miami. So here it was, Madam Speaker, that this region was literally at the mercy of Irma, because Irma by herself was going to shut down Miami. And we already saw that we had Houston already shut down. So it meant that rescue and resources had to come from the south, Madam Speaker. And I think that the help of Venezuela, the help of the Panamanians, and many of the other countries in the south are to be commended for what they did, particularly in helping with the evacuation of over 1,800 people in Barbuda, as well as being able to provide eventually supplies to Dominica. Immediately following Irma, Madam Speaker, was Jose, which initially was following the exact same track as Irma. So many of us were shuddering at the thought that countries that were already severely impacted, and I have to say to you, Madam Speaker, I had the opportunity to go to the BVI and to Anguilla, and I am still trying to understand in my mind what would have caused that level of devastation. Literally every leaf on every tree was gone. Boats were literally picked up as toys and spread all throughout the country. In fact, at one location, I would say to you, there was over 300 boats literally piled on top of each other. But every single vehicle that we saw had either broken windshields or damaged cars. And the country looked absolutely paralyzed. It was just incredible. And when we spoke to the people, and this was almost 6 days after the fact, Madam Speaker, that many people were still shivering. And many people said that this was not just a hurricane, but it was a tornado. And how terrified most of them were. And literally you could see that most people's homes were damaged. Anguilla was equally as damaged. And then we had the opportunity to go up to Turks and Caicos. But Madam Speaker, then came Maria. And I want us in St. Lucia to truly appreciate how close Maria came to coming to St. Lucia. In fact, it was on track to go between St. Lucia and Martinique. And the other terrifying thing about Maria, Madam Speaker, was that it went from a thunderstorm to a Category Hurricane 5 within 10 hours. In fact, in speaking to some people in Dominica, who went to their home thinking that they were going to be confronting a thunderstorm, and then all of a sudden, within 3 hours, that it had been upgraded to a Category 3 hurricane, of which at that point they could do nothing. And then for it coming into Dominica and coming in as a Category 5 hurricane. And the fact is that the hurricane took a path where it affected everybody in Dominica. It literally went right down the spine of Dominica, from north to south. And when you went to Dominica, Madam Speaker, and saw the level of devastation, it is heartbreaking. Literally every house that we saw, it was out without a roof. Dominica, which is fondly referred to us as the nature island, had no rainforest. The trees lay bare. In fact, the trees had been bleached, almost white, which was from the salt water in the air that had taken place. That almost 3 weeks after the fact, Madam Speaker, the town itself was still not operational. In fact, the Treasury was operating out of the Prime Minister's office because that's where there was a generator. But the rest of government was not functional. But the only works in clearing the roads was the works of the different military forces from the CARICOM that had come in and cleared those roads. And no work had even commenced on putting back the electrical wires. We see today that the port itself was congested in being able to handle the amount of aid, and clearly benevolence that was being brought to the doorsteps of Dominica. But Madam Speaker, I had at every moment to be reminded how easily this could have been St. Lucia. And I'm not so sure, Madam Speaker, that the infrastructure that we have today here in St. Lucia would in itself have offered us any further protection than what I saw in Dominica. The agricultural sector, the rivers, the landslides, people's homes, it was devastating. It was truly devastating. And while we were trying to get assistance from our good friends in Mexico, Madam Speaker, they themselves were affected by not one earthquake, but two, in which over 500 people lost their lives. And so we truly understood that our Mexican neighbors who wanted so desperately to help us, and I think that the evidence of Mexico's support to this region is there to speak for itself, but they themselves could not do it in their state of crisis. In addition to obviously devastating Dominica, obviously Maria took aim on Puerto Rico. And I think today we still see the results of that on TV, where in fact suggestions are, Madam Speaker, that it may take by Christmas in order for at least half the people to get their electricity back. I had the opportunity to meet with my colleagues in St. Martin and also my colleagues in the Virgin Islands. And every attempt to just get business open is what people are focusing on. Where is it that you've heard that literally a country comes to a grinding halt and basically put on hiatus, and that hopefully to reopen for business in January? And Madam Speaker, while we are very grateful that the Lord spared us, but at the same time we must recognize the impact that this has had on even St. Lucia. The number of St. Lucians who live and worked in those islands that were repatriating funds back to us. The opportunities for agriculture in terms of our farmers who were sending stuff to those northern islands, Madam Speaker. And no one knows when those countries are going to open up for business. But even more impactful, Madam Speaker, was what was happening with the cruise industry. The fact is that Puerto Rico is a major hub for us in the southern part of the Caribbean. While Barbados is a hub for the cruise ships coming out of Europe, Puerto Rico is the hub for the ships coming out of the north. And what I mean by that, Madam Speaker, is if they cannot use Puerto Rico, it means the ships would have to originate it out of Miami. And the only countries that could be benefiting from that on what we call a 7-day cruise would be, St. Kitts would be the furthest south that they could go to. So it means that the numbers of arrivals that we would be getting could potentially be thwarted by Puerto Rico not being open. And the situation in Puerto Rico, Madam Speaker, is very delicate. Puerto Rico finds itself in major debt. In fact, people have described Puerto Rico literally being bankrupt. That they have $85 billion worth of debt, which they cannot pay. And given the regulatory framework in Puerto Rico, they cannot declare bankruptcy. And so they're stymied. So even before the U.S. government looks to try to assist Puerto Rico with the infrastructure, they have to resolve what they're going to be doing with the debt. And I say that to say to Madam Speaker that Puerto Rico has managed to get the airport open, but in terms of the majority of hotels and certainly the attractions that existed in Puerto Rico, those are not open. And also the fact is Puerto Rico acts as a hub for some of the northern islands, and those northern islands are not open. So it means the volume of business going through the Puerto Rico airport, Madam Speaker, has been diminished significantly. Madam Speaker, I take my time to say all of this in order for us to truly appreciate what is it that we're facing. And this is a situation that there should be no political divide. And I certainly want to thank the Leader of the Opposition for his support when I've reached out to him in terms of keeping him abreast, and certainly his commitment to say that this is not about politics. But we also must be equally supportive and focused on how we're going to build resilience in St. Lucia. And I say this to you, Madam Speaker, that when I sat in my office and we started putting these efforts together, that we recognized that there was going to be a small window of opportunity for us in the Caribbean. The leader of the opposition hopefully would support me in saying that we in the Caribbean have been crying in the wind for a long time. We've been complaining of the fact that the OECD and the ODA, which is the Organization of Development Agencies, have basically classified countries into low income, middle income, and high income, and have used only one indicator to make that determination. And that indicator has been per capita income. That's it. So because the Caribbean islands have a higher per capita income, we have been classified as middle income countries. In fact, Antigua is on the verge of being graduated to becoming a higher income country. And we've been arguing, both sides and everybody in the Caribbean, that this is unfair. And that we as SIDS, as small developing states, ought to be classified by what we call a vulnerability index. In fact, I must commend the work that was done by the Commonwealth Secretariat in trying to put this vulnerability index together. So if I give an example, Madam Speaker, if you take the British Virgin Islands as an example, prior to the hurricane, they had a credit rating of A-. In fact, if you went to the World Bank and the IMF, they would probably hold them up as model countries that you ought to follow. But that financial security offered no resilience to the hurricane. So in fact, you went from a GDP of over $1 billion US, and I dare say that the BVI would be struggling to have a GDP of $250 million in 8 hours. So when we say that you can't use just one classification, one indicator to make that determination, we have gone to meeting after meeting after meeting. Madam Speaker, many solutions would have heard the name COP. And again, the world came together in Paris, I think it was in 2016, Madam Speaker, and there was a huge euphoria at the fact that we were able to sign this agreement. And this agreement basically, Madam Speaker, was really two components. One, that the world had given a commitment to try to prevent the warming of the earth to exceed 1.5 degrees. So the cry was 1.5 to stay alive. And the second part was that we were going to put together a fund of $100 billion, Madam Speaker. And that fund would be divided into two parts. One was called mitigation, and the other one was called adaptation. And I want to take this time, Madam Speaker, to define what those are. Mitigation, Madam Speaker, is to do things that are going to reduce the emissions into the hemisphere. The things that we would physically undertake to be able to prevent the warming of the globe by more than 1.5 degrees. Adaptation, on the other hand, Madam Speaker, is accepting the fact that we are going to see some global warming, and as a result of it, there is going to be a rise in the acidity in the water, there's going to be a rise in the water levels, and that more than likely we're going to see stronger and more frequent storms. And so therefore those monies would be used to assist countries in being able to build resilience. So building resilience, Madam Speaker, would be things like, I think it is accepted now that we must put all of our cables underground. Our communication lines, our electricity lines, all must go underground. This is not an option anymore. That we must build bigger drains in order to be able to capture the water. That we now need to strengthen the banks of our rivers. And we have to raise the height of our bridges. Because if we don't strengthen the banks of our rivers, and we don't raise the height of our bridges, what happens, Madam Speaker, is the same thing that we see take place every year. In fact, Nalgotut in Miku is a classic example, Madam Speaker, in which the water will come down the river, it gets blocked by the bridge, the sea level rises coming from the ocean, And so between the water now departing from the banks of the river and the water coming back up from the ocean, you end up creating a whirlpool. So that's why you'll go there and you'll see trees bent one direction on one side of the farm, and bent in a completely opposite direction on the other side of the farm. And you ask yourself, how is that physically possible? But more importantly, it is the water coming out of those riverbanks that truly causes the irreparable damage to our environment. Our banana trees break. But if they just break, within 4 to 5 months, they've resprouted. And so therefore you lose the income for those 4 or 5 months, and it's easy to say that we can get an insurance program in place, Madam Speaker, to cover that loss. But when now the water comes out of the river, and it literally rips out the roots of the banana tree, we're now talking about 14 to 15 months. And we're talking about a substantial amount of more money in order to be able to recover the situation. So resilience is critical. We have argued on both sides, on the global arena, that for us as small developing states, the only solution is resilience. Because it doesn't matter what level of mitigation that we take, Madam Speaker, we can never be in control of our own destiny. It is only the larger countries of the world that have to make that commitment, Madam Speaker. So we have continued to argue that the only way moving forward is we must get funds available to be able to build resilience. The dilemma that we faced prior to this perfect storm, Madam Speaker, was that while there was recognition what we were saying was correct, the $100 billion has not been manifested. In fact, it remains a number on a piece of paper, a wish list, a hopeful number that we might be able to get. But we've seen no indication or no signs that the world is committed to this. In fact, the United States' withdrawal from the COP agreement is another indication that the likelihood of us meeting $100 billion is not very strong. So I say this to you, Madam Speaker, that when we sat there as Irma was coming, we recognized that there was an opportunity. An opportunity to go one more time, because now not only did we have the empirical evidence, we now had the physical evidence of the impact of these storms on our region. And in the fall, Madam Speaker, there are a series of meetings that take place. There is what we call UNGA, the UN General Assembly meetings. Weeks afterwards, there is the World Bank and the IMF meetings. And then in November, we have COP. And I used my position both as chairman of the OECS, as well as the chairman of the sustainability portfolio, to now put together a strategy for us when we attended the UN. And I really want to thank, in particular, Prime Minister Gaston Brown and Prime Minister Roosevelt Skerrit, and the countries of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, the Prime Minister of Grenada, for the work that they did. And basically, if you listen to the speeches that we all delivered at the UN, we repeated the same things. That there needs to be, and we need to address the OECD and ODA classifications to us as countries. That we need to find funds that we can put together that we can have access to, and that we must focus our efforts on how we're going to draw down on those funds. Because that's the next problem. If you look at Haiti over the years as to how many billions of dollars was made available to Haiti to deal with their earthquake, how long has it taken for those funds to be drawn down to actually be spent to resolve the problem? And as solutions, and this is where the common sense comes in. So here we are, prior to a hurricane, going through a very methodical process to get projects approved. But once the hurricane hits, there's no rules. If we have to do excavation, nobody's looking at any, people want to solve the problem now. And our message to the world is that we are in crisis. Our message to the world, Madam Speaker, is that time is our enemy. We see time being our enemy in three critical ways. One, the opportunity costs that are lost every day because of the impact of the hurricanes. How much money has been lost by our farmers? How much money has been lost by Liad? How much money is lost by all the different businesses in this region who were doing business with all those islands? How much money has been lost on those islands because they have been closed? And the sad part about the monies I'm speaking about, there is no potential for those funds to be refunded, Madam Speaker. So that's why we say it's opportunity costs that are lost. The second one, Madam Speaker, which is a very harmful one, is migration. We've now seen it in all the islands, Puerto Rico, St. Martin, the Virgin Islands, and Dominica, where people feel a sense of hopelessness. People have their children to take care of, and they have to make a choice. And while Antigua and St. Lucia and many of the other islands have opened up their doors to allow those kids to come in, and all kinds of facilitations have been made, the parents themselves question why they're staying there. And Madam Speaker, there is an invisible, I call it an invisible and maybe unappreciated asset that all countries have, and that's our middle class. These are the people that are the leaders in our communities, that volunteer their time, that are members of boards. And once these people leave, Madam Speaker, how do you replace them? And maybe even a more descriptive example is when you lose the rainforest in Dominica. Is there a store that you can go to and buy a rainforest that you can have it back tomorrow? So that you can go to the hardware store and fix up your roof or fix up your home, or you can fix up the road? Okay? It is impossible to replace a rainforest without waiting time. And the same thing applies to when you have migration. It's only once that country begins to recover and people see hope again, and that once people have moved and may have gotten comfortable where they are, whether in fact they ever come back. The third one, Madam Speaker, is that within 9 months, the next hurricane season begins. That's the reality. So there was a movie in the States called Groundhog Day, repeating the same story over and over. And that is what we find ourselves in, Madam Speaker. So when I say that time is against us, time is against us. The next one that we have, Madam Speaker, is what is the cost of resilience. So whereas we're going to borrow money very soon, $150 million US, to be able to upgrade our existing roads, not build any new roads, Madam Speaker, to upgrade the existing roads. Without a doubt now, we have to put all of the cables and everything underground, which is going to come at an extra cost. We have to build bigger drains. And what I'm saying is that we're making this capital investment, which is absolutely necessary. We have no choice but to make this capital investment. But in terms of improving the capacity of our country, it doesn't. A bridge that you have to raise its height doesn't carry any more cars than it was carrying before. Putting down wires only helps build resilience, meaning that you have a storm that you can get up and recovered on a quicker pace. But the fact is you're taking monies to be able to do that. So let me put this in context now. Clearly, climate change is real. And while some countries in the world may not want to call it climate change, but may be willing to accept that there is a global warming taking place, the two produce the same results. That more than likely we're going to see more hurricanes, and we're going to see stronger hurricanes in the foreseeable future. That we have to now build resilience. Let me give you another example, Madam Speaker. We have for many years been using the schools as our shelters. We've now seen example after example where we should not do that. So in the case of a Dominica today, in which you have 80% of the homes that were damaged and people are still living in the shelter, how do you now coincide that with getting your schools back up and running? So there's a general recognition that we have to now build separate shelters for the people. So how much money are we talking about that we have to spend on this? The problem at hand, Madam Speaker, is that when we look at the finances of our country, there is no money. Not only there's no money, Madam Speaker, the fiscal space, the amount of money that we can borrow, is being restricted by the current level of debt that we have and the level of confidence that people would have in our economy if we make no changes. And the result of that, and because we are now classified as a middle-income country, that when we do have to borrow money, we're having to borrow them at commercial rates. And that's our dilemma. And so it becomes now a self-defeating prophecy, Madam Speaker. That on one hand, you recognize the urgency of 9 months' time and the need to go and make this necessary investment, and almost want to say at any cost, because how do you put a value on people's lives? Who's to say one solution's life is worth $10 million? Who's to say that? Who is going to make that judgment? And clearly, if we don't build the resilience, that is what we've done. We've put people's lives at stake, far less people's livelihoods. So, Madam Speaker, after attending the UN meeting, and I really want to also thank the government of the United Kingdom, the government of the Netherlands, the French, for a very fruitful and frank meeting that we had. Because what was interesting at that meeting, Madam Speaker, which was all the ministers of foreign affairs for those countries, was the UK was being hampered by the same problem. The UK government was not able to send ODA funding to the BVI in Anguilla because of the same categorization, because they were perceived to be middle-income and high-income countries. And they recognized firsthand the absurdity of what was taking place. And Madam Speaker, that certain countries did not see that the other Caribbean islands were their first source of support. So when you look at the Dutch, and I can say this because we've had this discussion with them, I'm not being negatively critical, I'm just being objectively critical, that they were trying to give support to the Dutch side of St. Martin from Curacao, whereas Guadeloupe is 15 miles away. The rest of the islands were here to give support. And this is why, in many ways, Madam Speaker, that St. Lucia offered the assistance to be able to bring prisoners to St. Lucia, was to reinforce the point that we can be of help, that we have to be part of your plans. We indicated that we have a vested interest to see those countries back up and running again, because many of our own citizens live and benefit from those economies. So, does St. Lucia have no responsibility for the St. Lucians who are in the BVI, in their safety, if there was something that we could do? But I know that the vast majority of St. Lucians understood the need to do what we did, and would understand that our government would never put the safety of St. Lucians at risk. But I say all of this, Madam Speaker, that when we went to the UN, the Secretary General of the UN, who is the former Minister of Finance and Foreign Affairs from Portugal, and who was instrumental, Madam Speaker, it works out, that when Jordan and Lebanon were having difficulties when the Syrian war broke out, and millions of people were migrating to those two countries, that he helped negotiate with the OECD and the ODA that a special dispensation be made for them to allow them to borrow monies at a concessional rate, because they saw that that migration problem was not of their doing, that this was a migration of a global magnitude, and therefore that concession was made. And it's when we presented our case to him that he truly recognized what we were facing. But more importantly, Madam Speaker, he didn't stay in his office in New York. He traveled to Barbuda and he traveled to Dominica, and I know how grateful Prime Minister Gaston Brown and Prime Minister Roosevelt Skerritt were for his visit. And I would say to you, Madam Speaker, it was his visiting those countries, his influence on other international leaders around the world, that produced the results that we saw at the World Bank and the IMF meeting. And I want to go on record, Madam Speaker, to truly thank the staff of the World Bank and the IMF for the work that they put into those meetings and the high-level meetings that were orchestrated to deal specifically with this issue of climate change and the impact it was having on SID countries. And so exactly what we were hoping is that if we went to the UN, made collectively enough noise and brought to the table real solutions, that now would carry over into the World Bank and the IMF meetings. And I have to say to you that that strategy played off very, very well. In addition to meeting those entities, Madam Speaker, we had scheduled prior to the hurricanes a trip to Canada. And the purpose of the trip to Canada, Madam Speaker, was to meet with the Canadian banks with regards to correspondent banking and de-risking and their overall business in the Caribbean. Because I think that we've all seen a drawback by those Canadian banks of their involvement in this region. And we were accompanied by Prime Minister Timothy Harris. We brought up the chairpersons of several of the CIP programs, and we also brought up the governor of the central bank. So because of the storms, we quickly moved to be able to get a meeting with Justin Trudeau. And again, I want to put on record where I thank the High Commissioner of Canadian High Commissioner based out of Barbados for assistance in facilitating that meeting. And we had a very good meeting with the Prime Minister and talked about the fact that he is on the G7. The G7 is the 7 largest economies of the world. And so he plays a very influential role on global policy. And that we needed for him to be the big brother. We talked about the fact that there has been a vacuum in this region of brotherhood. The Canadians, the British, the French, and the Americans have literally left this region to their own devices since the collapse of the Berlin Wall, or the demise of the Cold War. And we asked for his support to be able to re-engage into the Caribbean. And we said that we have a huge opportunity because coming in April, Madam Speaker, there is a very large meeting to do with the Commonwealth. And we're hoping that we can come up with a new framework for the Commonwealth as we know it. And now that England is leaving Europe, clearly I think that England wants to play a more significant role. And I have to say that the reception by the Prime Minister was very heartwarming. In fact, he arranged for me to meet with his Minister of Investment, and I also met with an organization called the CCC at the same time. Madam Speaker, it would also be well documented that I had arranged to go to a state visit to Mexico. And again, the timing of that visit was fortuitous. Fortuitous in that we were able to also engage President Peña Nieto on being a big brother. Because Mexico is part of the G20, 20 of the largest economies in the world. So one of the largest economies in our hemisphere. But more importantly, Madam Speaker, they existed before a policy that was called the Three Borders, which was Canada, CARICOM, and Mexico, in which the United States had policies to support the economic development of those countries, in recognizing that in doing so that you would strengthen the borders of America. But again, with NAFTA, the demise of the Cold War, that seemed to have fallen on deaf ears, And many of the benefits that we had been receiving, we lost. So in part, what we did was had a meeting with Canada and also with Mexico to encourage them to reconsider having a Caribbean-Mexico-Canadian summit. So I'm very happy to say to you, Madam Speaker, at the CARICOM Mexico summit that we had in Belize, that President Peña Nieto has agreed to put that forward. I know that we have gotten a verbal commitment from the Canadians, and I know that my colleague Prime Ministers in the CARICOM were very happy to hear that this is the direction we're going in. But as a first step, we're going to have a meeting with the governors of the central banks of Canada, Mexico, and CARICOM, hopefully as early as January, to meet to figure out how we can try to resolve this corresponding bank and de-risking situation. I say this all to say, Madam Speaker, that again, all of this came about because there was an opportunity where the world's attention was on the Caribbean. And again, in addition to the empirical evidence, we now had the factual evidence of the impact of what these hurricanes were on us. And the inability of our countries to be able to move forward without changing their thinking. So we have two meetings that are left for the rest of the year, Madam Speaker, that are very critical. One is we have the COP meeting, which is taking place in Bonn. There are several proposals that are being put on the table. One of them, Madam Speaker, is that we're participating in the development of what's called a white paper, a discussion paper, to look at the possibility of creating what we call a resilience bond. Because we don't believe that there's enough money available in the public sector to solve the Caribbean's longer-term problems. That we believe that we have to find a way to be able to attract private sector funds into it. There are trillions of dollars that are in either negative bonds around the world or in non-yielding deposits. So the question becomes, what's the framework that you have to create in order to allow the private sector to want to put their monies into the bonds in hopes that their monies will be secure and could produce a positive return? And that is the challenge that we've given to the authors of this white paper. We're then going, as I said, to follow up with Canada, Mexico, and Chile. And I'm also happy to report, Madam Speaker, that the Secretary General of the UN has commissioned a major donor conference in New York on November 22nd. And the purpose of this conference is to bring together world leaders, international organizations, on how we can get funds available now. So we talked about getting the monies available and also to discuss the mechanism on how we're going to draw down on these funds. What's going to be the conditionality to be able to draw down these funds? Because there's no point telling us the money is there. The leader of the opposition and I were joking because I said the CDB is the most politically correct organization in the Caribbean. Because one government starts the project and another government comes in and gets to either finish it. So it takes too long. And we've got to be able to resolve that. And we've got to recognize the time is against us if we have the will to be able to resolve that problem. So, Madam Speaker, the last one I want to say that in addition to Canada and Mexico is that we also had a state visit by the President of Chile. And at a recent meeting that the Minister of Foreign Affairs attended with the Lima Group, that we saw that Mexico, Canada, and Chile were able to very aptly present our case to some of the larger countries that were there and to understand more of what's taking place in the Caribbean. And what we're trying to stop is this level of criticism that sometimes is laid upon us in terms of why we make certain decisions. And the fact is that we as a region have had to make decisions based on survival. And that sometimes some of the more loftier goals have to be set aside because you can't get funds elsewhere. And so I'm never going to be critical of any of my colleagues for some of the decisions they may make that I may either support or don't support, because I understand the predicament that they're all in. So I wanted to report that to Parliament, Madam Speaker, and to say that we're going to continue to be able to fight very hard to bring a practical solution in real time to the island of St. Lucia and hopefully to the wider Caribbean. I thank you, Madam Speaker.